Director at the Center for Fiction. How many of you all are with us for the first time tonight? Oh, good. Oh, wonderful. Lots of hands. Welcome. The Center for Fiction focuses on the creation and enjoyment of fiction. And my mic might not be on. So please, thank you very much, Juliana. All right, welcome. The Center for Fiction focuses on the creation and enjoyment of fiction. We do our work through public events like this one. We host reading groups and writing workshops. We award a first novel prize and convene a cohort of talented writers for an annual Emerging Writers Fellowship program. Follow us on social, sign up for our mailing list so you don't miss future amazing conversations like this one. And get involved. Come have coffee right in this space, shop the bookstore, learn about our membership program, and support this work and this place anytime with a donation. One event to highlight this month, on Tuesday, October the 24th, come see Jesmyn Ward and Ta-Nehisi Coates at Town Hall. Two cultural powerhouse voices and an event and conversation not to be missed. So get your tickets now. A few housekeeping announcements. First, and always important, our cafe and bar will be serving until 8:30. So enjoy tonight's event, stay, enjoy a drink, have a conversation following the event. For Q&A, we will have an audience Q&A tonight. When it's time for questions, raise your hand. One of our fabulous interns will bring a mic to you so that the guests on the live stream can hear your question. If you're watching on the live stream, you may type questions into the chat at any time. Now for tonight's event. This conversation is part of our In Translation series, and the evening's program is central to our work celebrating storytelling in all its forms and highlighting globally significant voices. Now for our guests. Jenny Erpenbeck, author of Kairos, was born in East Berlin in 1967. On NPR, John Powers described the book as the richest portrait I've read of what happened to East Germans when their glumly repressive communist state was replaced overnight by a cocky, shopping-mad West Germany that instantly set about erasing the reality they knew, devaluing their money, dismantling their media, denying their values. In September of this year, 2023, the English translation of Kairos was longlisted for the National Book Award for Translated Literature. Jenny Erpenbeck is one of the most compelling voices in contemporary German literature, and it is very exciting to have her here tonight with us at the Center for Fiction. Gall Beckerman is the senior editor for books at The Atlantic. Formerly an editor at the New York Times Book Review, he is the author of The Quiet Before, on the unexpected origins of radical ideas, which was a New York Times notable book in 2022. His previous book, When They Come For Us Will Be Gone, won the National Jewish Book Award and was named a Best Book of the Year by The New Yorker and The Washington Post. He has a PhD in media studies from Columbia University and lives right here in Brooklyn with his wife and their two daughters. Welcome to the stage, Jenny and Gall. Come on. Turn your mics.
Are we on? Yes, we're on.
Hello.
Okay.
It's on?
Yes? Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see a full house and to be here with Jenny Erpenbeck, who I was just saying backstage, I am unabashedly an Erpenbeck fanboy, if such a thing exists. I think the first book of hers that I read was Go, Went, Gone, and I was hooked after that and have read everything. And it's a very exciting moment for me to be in conversation with you. So I think we said we'd start off the evening by having you read a little bit from Kairos, because to give people just a taste of the sound and the feel of the book. So let's do it.
Okay, just start. So perhaps I should just tell you that the book has mainly like two parts called Cardboard Box 1 and Cardboard Box 2. And it has a prologue, an epilogue, and something in between the boxes. And I invented this kind of literary category. I'm going to read the prologue and a tiny bit of the very beginning. Will you come to my funeral? She looks down at her coffee cup in front of her and says nothing. Will you come to my funeral? He says again. My funeral? You are alive, she says. He asks her a third time. Will you come to my funeral? Sure, she says, I come to your funeral. I've got a plot with a birch tree next to it. Nice for you, she says. 4 months later, she's in Pittsburgh when she gets news of his death. It's her birthday, but before she gets any congratulatory calls from Europe, she gets his son Ludwig on the phone saying, Dad died today, on her birthday. The day of his funeral, she's still in Pittsburgh. At 5 in the morning, 10 o'clock in Berlin, she gets up in time for the beginning of the ceremony, sets a candle on the hotel tabletop, lights it, and plays music for him from YouTube. The second movement of Mozart's D minor piano concerto, the aria from Bach's Goldberg Variations, the A minor Chopin Mazurka. Each piece comes with commercial interruptions. Tja, which ones? The new Hyundai, a bank offering home loans, a cold cure. When she returns to Berlin 6 weeks later, she sees the fresh sand pile next to the birch tree. The roses she got a friend to lay on the grave have already been cleared away. Her friend tells her all about the ceremony and the music that was played. What music was it? Mozart, Bach, and Chopin, her friend says. She nods. 6 months later, her husband is home by himself when a woman turns up and delivers 2 large cardboard boxes. She was crying, he says. I had to give her a handkerchief. The cardboard boxes are left standing around in Katharina's study into the fall. Each time the cleaning lady comes, Katharina moves them onto the sofa, and once the room's been cleaned, she puts them back on the floor. When she needs to use the library steps, she pushes them aside. She has no space on her shelves for 2 large cardboard boxes. The basement flooded recently. Maybe she should just take them to the dump? She opens one of them and looks inside. Shuts it again. Kairos, the god of fortunate moments, is supposed to have a lock of hair on his forehead, which is the only way of grasping hold of him. Because once the god has slipped past on his winged feet, the back of his head is sleek and hairless, nowhere to grab hold of. Was it a fortunate moment, then, when she, just 19, first met Hans? One day in early November, she sits down on the floor and prepares herself to sift, sheet by sheet, folder by folder, through the contents of the first box, then the second. It's so much detritus. The oldest items date back to 86, the latest are from 92. There are letters and carbons of letters, scribbled notes, shopping lists, desk diaries, photo prints and negatives, postcards, collages, a few newspaper clippings. A sugar cube from the Kranzler Café disintegrates in her fingers. Pressed flower petals slip out from between pages. Passport photographs stay pinned to pieces of paper. There's a twist of hair in a matchbox. She has a suitcase of her own. That's not me. She has a suitcase of her own full of letters, carbons, and souvenirs, flat product for the most part, as the archivists like to say, her own diaries and journals. The next day she climbs up the library steps, and takes it down from the top shelf. It's incredibly dusty inside and out. A long time ago, the papers in his boxes and those in her suitcase were speaking to each other. Now they are both speaking to time. A suitcase like that, cardboard boxes like that, full of middles and endings and beginnings, buried under decades worth of dust. Pages that were written to deceive, alongside other pages that were striving for truth. Things itemized, other things passed over, all lying together higgledy-piggledy. The contradictions and the denials, silent fury and mute adoration together in one envelope, in one folder. What is forgotten just as creased and yellowed as what, dimly or distinctly, one still remembers. While her hands pick up dust from the old folders, Katharina remembers how her father used to make guest appearances at childhood birthdays as a magician. He would throw a whole pack of playing cards up in the air and still manage to pick out the one that she or one of the other children had chosen. Am I allowed, or should we perhaps stop here? Because
let's stop.
it's speaking about paper, and I think this is a good moment to start.
So for people who have not read the book, which I assume there's a few, at the center of this book is a love story, right? A very tumultuous love story. Can you describe it for us? Because I'm curious to hear how you would describe the relationship.
And then it's his turn next.
To describe it?
Yeah. Then we see what differences there are. Also it's a love story between a man who is much older than the girl. He's like in his beginning 50s. She's 19. He's already married. She's still living with her parents at the time when she meets him. And in a way it starts when they look at each other in a bus. Mm-hmm. So that's it.
But
okay, this is cardboard box 1. And then there's the cardboard box 2. Then the love turns out to be complicated. It's very clear he's married and he stays married. Both is a problem. And then there are some other difficulties. So it turns into a really kind of a complicated thing. And what once started as a glorious almost utopian idea of love turns into something that is really hurtful, especially to her. And while they are dealing with their love in good times and bad times, the country in which they are living is also in a state of decay.
Yes.
And is lost in the end. And like the story is told in with a background of this crumbling state.
They meet in I think 1986. And then
So there's also some. I think the book gives an impression also of the daily life of people long before the wall fell.
Right.
So the not so dramatic parts of the normal life.
Yeah.
But it also gives an impression of the years after the unification. So it goes on until 1992, which is also a different side than the dramatic one of people just climbing into freedom.
I'm curious, because the relationship is one between a man in his 50s and a 19-year-old young woman, that people would go into reading about such a relationship with a lot of assumptions about, the power dynamic between them and sort of what it means. And it very much gets scrambled through the course of the book. Our sort of understandings or preconceptions
power about shifting all the time,
right?
Naja, one might think that she is like in the weaker position from the beginning on. There are many men saying no, because also the girls have some kind of power over the men. I don't know. I'm not a man. And it's in a way it turns out that he is very professional in techniques of manipulation.
Yes.
And he's like something like waiting for her betrayal, which he later on uses as a kind of an instrument to prolong the relationship,
Right.
where she just spends one night with some other guy of her age.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now you sort of alluded to this in the way you described the love story, but it's also a love story about East Berlin. It seems to me. There's also, I mean, is that correct? Is that accurate to say? It's East Berlin itself appears as a sort of an intense place, but also a place where that almost feels like safe in its way. There's one scene that maybe one of my favorite in the book where she gets a pass to go to West Berlin to visit her grandmother, right?
Yeah, for her birthday.
Yeah, for her birthday, and it's the first time she's been to West Berlin, right? And because the family was separated, and the grandparents would come to visit East Berlin, but never the other way around. And she's assaulted by the West, right? She feels there's one scene where she goes into a sex store, right? But she's never seen anything like that before, and it's so overwhelming to her. And as a reader, you just want her to go back to East Berlin, to this sort of safe place. I mean, there's a lot of intensity in that closeness of East Berlin, as witnessed from this relationship. But I wonder if this book also was an opportunity for you to sort of engage with your feelings about the place where you grew up.
Yeah, the freedom didn't only come as something nice, but also as a kind of a shock to all of us in the East, because it involved also the freedom to like make a living and to pay a higher rent and things like that, and the freedom to lose your job and the freedom to look for something else and things like that. And it also, to all of us, it was a shock to see people begging for money on the streets. It was like we couldn't believe that such a thing really existed.
Yeah.
In East Germany, if there would have been someone on the street begging, there would immediately someone come after you and ask you, why aren't you working,
Right.
and you would be put to some company
Right.
for doing some work, that it was not existing that people couldn't work or wouldn't work. And the living costs were very low, so the rents were very low. I will never forget. I paid for 2 rooms and a bath and a kitchen of perhaps like 50 or 60 square meters. I would pay 40 marks and 25 Pfennige. This is
not a lot.
kind of nice. I think, especially to New Yorkers, it's,
Yeah.
it's like, how can that be? It was fantastic. And things like that came as a shock, and also, of course, the shock of the porno industry.
Yes.
So it was like everything was possible, but in a way, it also took the innocence away.
Yeah, it wasn't that sex didn't exist in East Berlin, but there was something about the sort of a society that has secrets, where people are the hidden quality of the way sometimes.
It was not so much about hiding, and it was not so much about selling.
Okay.
And I think this is the
distinction.
The main difference, that it was not about selling sex
Okay.
and buying sex, and there were no prostitutes only in the international hotels where some Westerners would be staying. There were some, but only to make it look like in the West for the Westerners. but not there was no normal prostitute to be seen on the streets, and also the sexuality was perhaps in a way more free. It was also if you wanted to marry someone, it was not the question of sharing money, of like having some capital together. Capital, it was not about financing this and that. It was just marrying, and when you didn't like the one anymore, you could just get divorced, and that was it. Also for women, it was much easier to go away. They were independent. They were working on themselves. They were working themselves. I think the rate of the women who had jobs on their own was like 90%, something like that. So this made a big difference.
Yeah. This seems, from all your books, to be, to my mind, the most personal and intimate in some ways, and I, can see that, it tracks very much certain aspects of your life. I mean, I don't know about the story with Hans, but I know that you were the same age as Katerina when the wall fell. The same sort of formative experience of growing up in East Berlin, and in some ways, it's a smaller canvas than your other books, which span 100 years, or that they. So what was different about the experience of writing this book, because it was tapping into such a personal experience you had?
You're right. It's in a way it goes deeper in the details of the story, and it's not so much about like looking at a whole century and different people.
Right.
You will only have the two people.
Right.
And there are some more, but the main characters are only two. For me, it was. I thought it must be interesting to tell the slow process of this kind of transition from a good relationship to a bad one, as well as the transition from hopes that we had in the socialist state to society that failed to be a real socialist one. And I thought I can only tell it in detail, because it's a slow process. It has many aspects, and it's as if the future is having the roots already in the present, but you can't see it, or you can only see a bit of it, and then it will start growing and making a problem. And it was the first time when I looked into my diaries of that time again, and I was so lucky to have my own diary, so that I didn't have to go into some archive, and I would also interview my friends and speak a lot about our favorite cafes at this time and the films that we saw and all this. So it was also a way to tell our story, a generation's story of Berlin life.
Right.
And I thought I wrote some things in my diary I didn't remember anymore, but then they came back to life. So one of the scenes here is when at the very end, also before the wall fell, there were preparations to have the anniversary of the foundation of the state. And Katharina, the main character, is first she's in the opera house and she doesn't like the opera. So she leaves the opera house in the pause. Then she gets outside to Unter den Linden, this big street in the middle of Berlin, and they are building up some decoration for the celebration of the anniversary of the state, hoping that the state will exist some more years, which wasn't the case, as we all now know. And then she passes and it's a bit spooky scene. So it's like in the dark, and they have these lights on it to make the preparation, and all the facades of the tribunes and all this. And then she passes a church, and she just enters the church because she sees that there's something going on, and she is in the middle of a event that is organized by the opposition, which was like based in the church. And also this kind of theater, she's not feeling home there. So she has different kinds of theater, and she's just moving on and not feeling connected to any of those kinds of theater.
Yeah.
And I think such a thing happened to me, and I found it in my diary, so I put it in the book. Yeah, I thought it's interesting, so that she also, like me,
Right.
It's almost a she now. It's so far away from me.
And you'd forgotten about that experience?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also some tiny details of how we felt like coming to West Berlin for the first time, and how it was to be like, people outside might have thought that it's the same city, but for me it felt like Paris landed on a flying carpet beside my hometown, and it was a complete strange city to me. I had no experiences made in the city. I haven't been to the cinema, to the theater. I haven't been a child, in West Berlin. Yeah. It was a complete strange city, and on days when I didn't feel so well because of, I don't know, being stressed, being upset, being whatever, I would try to make a detour to avoid going through West Berlin. So also this I put in the book. Yeah. So Katharina has a bit of me, and a bit of some others.
Yeah. I'm curious how that experience of growing up in, and I know this is true from this wonderful book of essays that you have, the experience of growing up in East Berlin and also living through the rupture of the wall and this magic carpet landing in your city, how it shaped your ideas about history. Because I mean, history is such a dominant force in all of your books. Even in this book, even in Go Went Gone, which is ostensibly a narrower story, you still, the stories of the African refugees who are in that book connect to mythic stories and stories of exile and return from hundreds of years ago. So history is always sort of coursing through the book. You have this very expansive view. And I know that you talk about growing up with ruins in East Berlin, that shaped in some ways, seeing the past and the present and the decaying past. And so talk a little bit about that. And also the way that the fall of the wall was a moment where you realized how quickly history could change, and something that you thought was permanent could suddenly become transitory and not ever be the same again.
Now, I think the question of inside and outside was a very basic experience that we all had in East Germany. So especially in Berlin, of course, in a way, the West Berliners were surrounded by the wall, while we were allowed to travel into the country. Right. Only West Berlin was like, we called it like an island in the Red Sea. So it was a very, we were used to this experience of like even listening to the West, but without being allowed to travel to the West. It was very close, or we would listen to the subway underneath, which was the Western subway. Wow. And the stations that were on the way through the east were closed. And at the very end, when the wall already was gone, at the very end of GDR, some students would put figures into these stations, so like sculptures.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like some spooky landscape if you passed these empty stations from like 1961, in the state of 1961 when the wall was built, with all these sculptures on it. And things like that made a strong impression on us, I would say. And then the idea of like that you have the choice of a society that is closed and feels safe, which is nice to many people, and as also having the opposite way of being, like have an open society with a lot of freedom, but also nobody who cares for you.
Right.
You have to take care for yourself, which also lots of people like a lot, but there are both ways of existence where after a while well known to us, and the advantages of each of these ways of life. And my first book, The Story of the Old Child, is also dealing with the question of being inside and outside. So there's a woman pretending to be a child, and she puts herself into an orphanage in order to have a safe, safe house, and people caring for her. And she even wants to like step back and go back into childhood because she thinks it's easier. And these were things that we only realized a bit later, that that freedom also is a challenge to everyone.
Right. This idea that history plays a big part in your books. There's always a larger force, right, and that certain events recur again and again. I mean, you take Visitation. It's one house. It's the story, for those who haven't read, Visitation is about a house on a lake and the different people that move through this house over the course of 100 years. End of Days is about a woman also over the course of about 100 years, right, who lives and then dies and then lives again. Different contingencies sort of shape the course of her life. But history sort of moves forward, moves through these people's lives. And I wonder, as a writer, how do you balance sort of making your books about that force while also keeping in mind the individual and the individual's agency? Because it can seem like, I can imagine, even in this book, it's an allegory in some ways. I'm assuming, that the relationship is telling us something about East Berlin and the world that was, and then the world that collapsed, and this thing that looked beautiful but became rotten inside, right? But it's an allegory, but it's also about two people, right? So how? I mean, it seems like, you do it so well, but it seems like a hard thing to do.
Thank you. I think there's not such a thing like history existing apart from the people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's only to be seen, and it's only existing in the concrete lives of concrete people.
Right.
And so you will have always 100 or millions of points of views to look at history. I would never ever say, for instance, that my book is the book about like the end of the GDR and the socialist utopia and all this. There are many books, and it's interesting to see how many different ways exist to describe this process of transition and where it came from, what the reasons were, and so on and so on. And it's also interesting to us now, I think, because I can see that we are also in a process of transition just now. For instance, I went to Hadestown, to the musical, and I, all of a sudden I was like, "Oops, what are they saying or singing?" And what they sang about a wall and that the wall around the underworld makes you feel safe, you know, and it reminded me of some politician and of like also the ideas of like keeping refugees out.
Yeah.
And all this, it's still a question which is being put to us in the present too.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about music in your work, or the relationship between your writing and music. I know that you have a previous career very much involved in music, and I could feel in this book sort of somebody who was attuned to opera in particular. There's something that feels operatic about their relationship. I mean, there are certain moments, like the first time that Hans and Katrina make love is to the sounds of Mozart's Requiem.
But this is not an opera.
It's not an opera. No, I know. Thank you. Though it's a very disturbing moment because that can't be a good start to a relationship if the Requiem is playing in the background. But it seems also just rhythmically, and the way that you will sometimes repeat phrases in your books, or certain motifs that kind of reoccur, that it feels very musical, very sort of symphonic in the way that it's put together.
Naja, in a way, when I write, of course, there's a lot of music still like in my head from my former life as an opera director, and from not only from this profession, but also from listening to music all the time and dealing with it and loving it. And I wouldn't say that I plan to do it in this way because I was connected to music, but the idea of repetition, for instance, I always liked very much, because a repetition is never a repetition. You will have a sentence in one situation, and then the sentence is again there a bit later, and there happens something in between, and this changes the sound of the sentence, even if it's the same words.
Right.
And I like this very much to like tell a story by always measuring it at these like points or sentences or leitmotifs, as Wagner called it. You can see what motion happened in between when you see the same sentence, and you will look at it in a different way because you know much more. And with this book, the whole book itself is like having the same material of this very first encounter they had, and then again and again some layer is taken off the story, and you will see the same situation in a different light. So this is also something that music can do beautifully. When you have a motive that is like sounding nice in the beginning, and then it turns into something that is lost already.
In the United States, in the literary community, there's a raging debate now about what authors can write about, or who they can embody, what characters they can depict. And in your work, I noticed that you let your mind roam freely in history. So I'm thinking, for example, in Visitation, you tell there's one story is of a Jewish girl who's hiding, right? There's a Jewish character also in the beginning of End of Days, right? The family there. There's the African refugees in Go and Gone, who we get very close to inside their head. Do you feel this level of inhibition that American writers feel, or is it not something that is sort of translates into the world of German literary world? Because
I think this is also an important question of freedom nowadays. It's as you put it, I took my freedom, and I always will. Because I think our profession is, in the center of our profession, is it to to make someone's story your own. So even when I said my younger self is so far from me that I sometimes look at it as if I would look at some stranger or some other person, what would I be allowed to write about? Only about a woman in my age and with my problems? But this is not about literature, Literature is, the idea of literature, I think, is to go into stories of other people, to make it your own in order to understand better, to open your mind to stories of other people. It's also about being interested, being curious about it, trying to get closer to someone.
Right.
So it's a way of, one of the very rare ways of like connecting people. And if we would stop to be curious or interested or open-minded to someone else and just making his or her story to like our own, it would be a very boring society, I think.
It seems, hearing you talk about it, it seems very much like what we see happen in Go and Gone with Richard, and the way that he gets close to these people who have backgrounds that could not be more different from him, but he engages in this.
Yeah, the question is it possible to understand someone else?
Right.
And some people might say no,
Right.
But I think I believe in exchange of opinions and of I believe in talk between people or emotion between people that brings us closer together.
Right.
And it's we shouldn't stop doing so.
I mean, in that book, it's the storytelling, right? That when they start to reveal the stories, the refugees start to tell the stories, is when he begins to come closer to them and sort of he's able to.
And it makes you think about things that you perhaps never encountered before, and it's, we all need to learn all our lives. So if you stop being interested and just playfully taking this part when you are writing, you couldn't describe things, and especially with the Go and Gone, it's a question if someone can. Am I not allowed anymore to write about a bad character by giving him bad words? This is an interesting question. How can I characterize someone that I don't like if I'm not daring using bad words or
or depicting them negatively.
So and it's always a question: is this the author who's saying so, or is this a character saying so? There's a big difference. It's a huge difference. If you look at Shakespeare and Richard III, Richard III is definitely not a nice character, but it's interesting to read, and you understand things, and even by being shocked, you learn something. You grab something that you perhaps wouldn't be open without being shocked.
Okay, one more question, then I'm going to ask for questions from the audience. For your generation of German writers and the generation before you, focusing on memory and the past and trying to sort of grapple with Germany's own history has been a sort of a major theme in literature, in German literature. I wonder, is that true of the younger generations that you see growing up? Is it something that is shifting at all? Or I mean, I'm asking for in a very obviously there's many authors working on many different topics, but to the extent that you can sort of capture something about sort of what you see in the trends of writing.
I think that as far as I saw it with students that I had in creative writing departments, I would say history is not so interesting to them anymore as a subject. They are not in a way everything became more private stories.
Interesting.
And only I think the ones who emigrated to Germany or flew, also that came to Germany because of some problems in their home countries.
Right.
They would have a much bigger consciousness about like what you can carry with you
Right.
as like immaterial things, like culture, like songs, like stories, like recipes too, from your home, and they would have a consciousness about what it means to carry your past with you and becoming someone else, and things like that. But the new generation is, I would say, they turn to the present itself. It's much more about their way of living and of like loving and things like that without history.
Does that tell you something about Germany itself, and you know?
I think that's the way of life they experienced. What for many people was a challenge to take this transition from East Germany becoming West Germany is a like a gift for writers, because it gives you the idea of different societies being possible at all in a deeper way, you know, when you experience it yourself. There was not much of a change in the last 40 years.
They haven't felt that same kind of...
I don't... They are lacking experience in a way, but they are not lacking experience. They have different experiences, I would put it like this.
Right, but history hasn't sort of
barreled
through their lives.
History is not in the middle of their attention. They are like...
Right.
Perhaps they are even... You know, even East Germany is far away already, and this is perhaps also the hope that the unification will happen with some new generations.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Wonderful work, wonderful. Thank you very much. Wonderful work, wonderful book. You have a quote that recurs in the book. You use it like a musical refrain. Be young, say the dead. Or say the dead, be young. So I read it, I was thinking, who's this? Who's this? I couldn't find it on Google or any of the usual sources. It sounds like Brecht. And I said that in print, and I'd like to know if I was right. But is it Brecht? And then besides that, one other great theme of the book is death. Hans is constantly talking about it, certainly making love for the first time to Mozart's Requiem for the Dead is a resonant image. And and of course the death of the old society of the East Germany begins with the very section you read, begins with the funeral. Can you talk about that theme in the book? And do answer my question, please.
I like that very much, and also the question. The interesting idea is that our present is the future of the people who already passed away. So we have to make something out of it. So they aren't able anymore themselves. And so in the book, it's like the generation of Bertolt Brecht and Hans Eisler and all those like old and very smart communists who really hoped for a better society. And they are putting a question to us. What did we do with their hopes? So why couldn't this work? What mistakes were made so that this way of trying something else, which was new to mankind, failed? especially after World War II, there was a great hope involved that we might be able to found a society that isn't based on like buying and selling all the time, and didn't work. So we still have to keep searching. And I'm happy that you mentioned this. This word of the dead people is always present in the book, and of course it's also in the beginning and the prologue.
Yeah.
And I think death is always a moment that puts a question to us. So, what kind of life was this? What is the essence of it? And who was it? Who died and who was there? And in those moments of loss, there's often the feeling that you want to do some, not research, but know better who passed away and how to deal with it. And also this book, this process is in the book. Katharina also goes through some archive, and it's like a research on her own life, but also on his life, and in a way, also his biography takes us to a dead end, so to say, as it was with the streets ending at the war.
Right.
Peaceful but dead end, as the word says.
Is that like, he wanted to know if that was actually like a quote? Was that a quote? What was the line?
No,
again?
this is my No, this is my invention.
It's an Erpenbeck.
You are allowed to quote it. I give you the permit. Special permit.
Let's go to the back over there. Gentleman with a beard. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here and speaking so openly about this book. It's beautiful and important and heartbreaking. Brecht, you were just speaking about, seems to haunt the story in some ways, and theaters and stages loom large in Katharina's awakening in so many ways, and scenes that seem, and encounters that seem to happen literally on stages or around or near stages, whether they're actual or sort of impromptu stages like you described in the scene in the church. And I'm just wondering, is structurally and thematically, was this something that was important to you in the inception of the book, or was it something that developed, and how does it relate to your own life and history as an artist? Yeah.
I like the black space of an empty stage, and also in the book Visitation about this house, I have a character called the gardener who's always like clearing the stage for the next owners to show up and to own the place for a while, and then they are forced to leave again, and then he's like working in the garden, and I think this is also a kind of a stage.
And doesn't Katharina's affair takes place also on a stage, right?
No, it's not on the stage. It's in the studio of the stage designers.
Okay.
It's always. I was working at the theater, and I do like the the more distant look at it. If you see some things going on the stage, but if you're working on a theater, you will also know what's going on behind the stage or on the sides, or the props being put here and there, and they have their own lives on stage, things like that. And I really like it a lot, and of course it's also about life. So there are always things that are revealed and like presented. And then there will be things that are not spoken about, or they are hidden, or the secret life of stories. And this also has a lot to do with the stages. Yeah.
Yes, right here. You, in the purple shirt. Yeah.
It's a pleasure to listen to you.
I'm very interested in you talking about going back to your diaries. And I'm wondering if, when you did that, if you had the experience that I've had in looking at 35-year-old diaries, that you remember certain things completely wrong, and that maybe things that you remember as completely wonderful or completely terrible were actually much more complicated. So I'm wondering if that happened to you, and if it did, when you're faced with your diary telling you something then you remember, did it change what you wanted to write? Did it change the story in any way?
Yeah, there was one thing I would always tell people. I didn't go to West Berlin before. I think I used to say before 2 months or 3 months had passed. Actually, it was only 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but in my mind it grew. And just to tell people that I was not like desperately longing for like going to the West and feeling so like dependent from this experience. But in the end, it was only 2 or 3 weeks. But still, it was the same thing. At this time, it meant a lot not to go to the West Berlin before 3 weeks had passed. So even this was kind of strange. So I refused to do so, and I didn't want to have the welcome money.
Yeah, you didn't you resented the money. What was it called?
It's also a kind of arrogance, I must confess, but still, perhaps it was meant as a nice gesture from the West that they offered us, each of us, 100 marks. But on the other hand, when the unification took place, we could keep, I think, 4,000 or 6,000 marks as they were, and the rest was made into half of it on our accounts. And compared to this, 100 marks of welcome money were not that much.
Yeah.
So I got the feeling that they just want to allow us with the first 100 marks to explore the market and to get greedy for all those goods, and then what actually happened.
Like a drug dealer a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. It's a comparison that makes sense. And then of course when the elections took place, the major part of the East Germans voted for becoming Westerners, which was very clear. Was this the question?
How did you remember?
I remember. Honestly said, one is not happy perhaps about all passages in the diary of like 30 or 40 years ago. So I was ashamed for some passages because they weren't as well written as I thought they were.
So we were not going to see them being published at some point.
No, I'm not a nice mean, I wish they were.
I think we have time for one more.
I think the lady.
Yes, let's
to
get
the
it.
left. Yeah. No. Yeah, this one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ich dachte schon, ich komme nicht mehr dran. Thank you so much for coming here tonight. This was such a wonderful event. And I can't wait to dive into the novel. I grew up in Germany myself, and I've lived in the States for a couple of years, so I'm out of touch with the German literary scene. But I'm just very curious how you as the author feel your work might be perceived and received differently in Germany versus in the US. Like, do you feel like there's different aspects of your work that people focus in on when they discuss it? And I'm just curious about that experience from your perspective.
I think that the culture of reviewing books in general is very different in the US from how it is in Germany. In Germany, it's normally they tell the plot.
Really, the whole
this
even what we call the spoilers.
Nah, not the spoil. No. This they don't do. But they for quite a while they tell the plot, so that the writer gets the idea of, okay, it's all about plot. I'm not convinced. Plot is important, but not that important. And then they, in a way, they don't look at my other books as the reviewers here did it so well in many cases. Mm-hmm. So they would read my other books. They would look for subjects that I'm dealing with, or have been dealing with for years. Mm-hmm. So they wouldn't put it in this kind of and this greater field of understanding what I'm dealing with, and what really surprised me was there's a Moscow chapter in this book. There's also a Moscow chapter in End of Days. Yeah. Which is in the center of the book and is a very dark chapter. And the chapter here, the Moscow chapter, is I would say literature students could really study how I made it, if they want to. It's daytime. Hans and Katharina are spending their 1 week of holiday together, the only week they have. At daytime, he will show her all the beautiful things and sights and making tours. And at night, he's thinking about what he is hiding from her and what only he knows but won't tell her about all the people who were, the communists, shot by their own people during the immigration in the 30s, the Stalin era, and all the dark side. Mm. And there's in the center of this chapter there is a subway ride, saying always the light at the station and the dark in between, and the light at the station and the dark in between. So it's very clear. Mm. You don't need a study to understand this, I thought. But in Germany, especially in Western newspapers, when they mentioned the chapter, they got kind of angry. This former, this East German writer, she's speaking again about Moscow, and she's glorifying Moscow. And then I thought, didn't they read about the Knights? There was, and then I thought, it was really strange, because it was not not paying attention to this dark side, but as if they had no instruments to see it. Mm. And then this is an interesting question, I think, because the communists that came back from the Soviet Union, from the immigration, and who survived these prosecutions by Stalin and the Soviets, they were the founders of our state. So they were also they formed the language in the newspapers. All the fear they had before would make them silent and not speak about all these things that happened in the Soviet Union. And the silence was something that was very in the center of our country, and that also was part of the failing. Mm. That there was no true language. And the Westerners, they didn't have the problem. They didn't have someone building up their state, coming back from communist immigration and all this. And they didn't have this kind of language too, so they were happy. But I thought this was interesting, because it was not about saying the book is good or bad, but it was not seeing some aspects of it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jenny. Yeah, I think we're at time.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Really appreciate it, Gal, Jenny. For those of you, we're going to do, the books are all signed, but we're also going to do personalization. So if you already have purchased your book from the bookstore, we're going to
You
get
don't
Jenny
put your
set
hand.
up just outside these doors. So just go ahead and line up. And if you haven't had a chance to buy your book yet, head to the bookstore. They're beautifully on the cart there, and you can just grab one and then come back in and join the line. So thank you. Have a good evening. Appreciate your coming.
Danke.
Yes.
Es war sehr nett.
Sehr nett.
Hat mich sehr gefreut. I hope it was okay.
It was wonderful. Yeah. Do you feel good?
Ja.
Yes. Good.
Also das ist mein Buch.
That's your book. I have mine with your inscription, which I'm very excited to.
Very good. Congratulations.
Thank you for the question. It was nice questions.
Thank you for all the work.